The winter of 1945. The Baltic Sea lay frozen under a sky heavy with smoke and fear. Germany was collapsing. The Red Army was advancing west, unstoppable. And in the chaos, began one of the largest, yet least remembered evacuations in human history. Operation Hannibal. Between January and May of 1945, more than 2 million people, soldiers, civilians, nurses, and children, fled the Eastern Front aboard German ships, their only escape across a sea that had turned into a graveyard. But among those thousands of vessels, there were a few convoys that never made it, ships that vanished into the fog, leaving behind no wreckage, no survivors, only whispers. They came to be known as the Ghost Convoy of the Baltic Sea. The story begins in the dying days of Nazi Germany. Admiral Karl Dönitz, desperate to save civilians and retreating troops, ordered every available ship to the Baltic ports, Gotenhafen, Königsberg, and Pillau. Everything that could float, fishing boats, cargo ships, passenger liners, was pressed into service. But as the evacuations began, chaos ruled the harbors. Tens of thousands crammed onto ships meant for a few hundred. Mothers were separated from children. Soldiers begged for space on lifeboats. And in the middle of it all, the Soviet submarines were waiting. Every ship that left port entered a deadly maze of mines, torpedoes, and ice. One after another, they were struck down. The Wilhelm Gustloff, the General von Steuben, the Goya, each carrying thousands of souls to a frozen grave. But this story is not about those famous disasters. This story is about the ships that simply vanish. In early February 1945, a convoy of 6 evacuation ships left the port of Pillau under the cover of night. Their decks packed with refugees, their holds filled with wounded soldiers. They sailed north into the darkness of the Baltic and were never seen again. No distress calls, no wreckage, no bodies, only silence. For decades, no official record mentioned the convoy again. Some said it was sunk by Soviet torpedoes. Others claimed the ships hit a minefield. But survivors from nearby vessels reported something stranger. A formation of ships seen in the distance, sailing in perfect line, then disappearing into the fog. And when search teams went looking after the war, there was nothing there. It was as if the entire convoy had slipped beneath the ice, or into another world altogether. This is the story of that disappearance, of what witnesses claimed to see in the mist, of the radio transmissions that were never explained, and of the divers who would later risk their lives searching for a ghost fleet beneath the Baltic Sea. Because some say, those ships are still down there, their lights faintly glowing in the dark, waiting to be found. It was February 12, 1945. The temperature had dropped below -20. The Baltic Sea was no longer water. It was a field of broken glass and floating ice. And yet, 6 ships pushed forward into that nightmare, carrying more than 10,000 souls fleeing the advancing Red Army. The convoy was led by a passenger liner named SS Hansa. Behind her, smaller cargo ships followed, Thielbeck, Amberlin, Berbel, and to others whose names are lost to time. Their route was supposed to be simple, Pillau to Kiel, a desperate dash across 600 kilometers of freezing sea. But halfway through the journey, the radio logs tell a different story. Around midnight, operators on the Hansa reported unusual interference, crackling noises, faint Morse code that didn't match any known signals. The captain dismissed it as static, but a few minutes later, the crew of Amberlin claimed they saw light flashes ahead of them. Not explosions, not flares, just glowing shapes moving slowly through the mist. And then, silence. One by one, the ships stopped responding to radio contact. By morning, the entire convoy had disappeared from German radar. The last transmission ever received came from Thielbeck's first officer. His voice trembling, he said only 3 words: "The sea is burning." And then, nothing. Days later, reconnaissance planes were sent to search the area. They found no oil slick, no floating debris, only endless ice and the faint outline of something massive beneath it. But before recovery teams could reach the site, a storm hit the Baltic. Waves taller than houses crushed the ice fields and scattered everything. When the skies cleared, the location was gone. The war ended 3 months later. Operation Hannibal was over. Millions had escaped, but hundreds of ships never returned. The official reports called it losses due to combat. But among sailors, the whispers spread about the convoy that vanished into thin air. In the years that followed, the Baltic became a graveyard of wrecks. Fishermen reported strange catches, twisted steel fragments, frozen relics from ships that had no records. And deep-sea sonar scans in the 1970s showed outlines of vessels where no wrecks were supposed to exist. 3 long shadows, perfectly aligned, as if still sailing in formation. Divers who went down said their instruments malfunctioned near the site. Compasses spun wildly. Lights dimmed. One diver claimed he heard voices echoing through the headset. A German lullaby, faint and broken by static. When he surfaced, his partner swore there was no sound at all. To this day, no one knows what really happened to the Ghost Convoy of the Baltic. Some historians insist it was sunk by Soviet submarines. Others believe the ships were caught in a methane eruption or underwater explosion. But there's one report, buried deep in the archives, that suggests something far stranger. In 1952, 7 years after the war, a Soviet hydrographic vessel named Vostok 12 was assigned to map a section of the Baltic Sea. A sector known to locals as the Silent Corridor, the same area where the Ghost Convoy had vanished. The mission was routine, or so they thought. For the first few days, the crew recorded normal sonar readings. But on the fourth night, their instruments began to behave strangely. The depth meters spiked without reason, showing trenches that didn't exist. At 2:17 hours, a low-frequency hum passed through the hull. Not like an engine vibration, but a deep tone that every man on board felt in his chest. And then, in the middle of that frozen silence, the sonar operator whispered, "There's something moving below us." They dropped the sub-camera line, and what the lens captured still defies explanation. The footage, later confiscated by Soviet intelligence, showed 3 enormous shapes, perfectly aligned, each almost 200 meters long, half buried in silt. The bow of the first ship still had faint white letters, Hansa. When they tried to descend again, the winch motor failed. The cable snapped, and through the water microphone came the sound of a bell. 1, 2, 3 rings, slow, deliberate, echoing through the black water. The captain ordered an immediate withdrawal. But before they left, one crewman, a young engineer named Petrov, wrote in his logbook, "The sea is not empty. They are still sailing, just deeper now." That report never made it to Moscow. The Vostok 12 disappeared 2 weeks later en route to Leningrad. No distress call, no wreckage, only a faint signal picked up by Finnish coastal stations, on SOS repeating a single coordinate again and again. Those numbers were later matched to the exact route of Operation Hannibal. After that, Soviet authorities declared the entire zone restricted. Fishing vessels were ordered to stay clear. On official maps, the area was labeled as unstable seabed, but to the locals, it became known as the Drowned Passage. Decades passed. The Cold War ended, and then in 1994, Swedish marine archaeologists, searching for a downed World War II bomber, accidentally picked up an anomaly, a signal too strong to ignore. The sonar image was impossible. 3 massive silhouettes, still side by side, partially fused with the seabed, yet casting perfect reflections. The divers who went down that year reported no wrecks, no debris, only an eerie metallic glow that seemed to pulse beneath the sand. When they surfaced, the lead diver refused to go back down. His report ended with just 4 words, "I heard engines running." Since then, every attempt to revisit the site has ended in failure. Equipment malfunctions, GPS drift, strange magnetic interference, and yet, in rare calm nights, ships passing near the Drowned Passage still report flickering lights beneath the waves, and the faint echo of a foghorn that hasn't sounded since 1945. In 2011, an independent exploration team from Finland, led by marine researcher Elias Korhonen, decided to reinvestigate the coordinates of the Drowned Passage. Armed with modern sonar, submersible drones, and digital recording gear, they believed they could finally reveal the truth behind the Ghost Convoy. For the first 36 hours, everything went according to plan. Clear waters, stable readings, and nothing unusual. But on the second night, their equipment started to act strange. The depth scanner began to pulse on its own, sending out sonar waves no one commanded. And then, from the darkness below, a faint signal came back, a Morse code transmission. When decoded, it spelled only one word, help. The team assumed it was interference, but moments later, their underwater drone's live feed flickered on screen, showing a shape, vast and unmistakable, the hull of a warship, its steel plates still gleaming under layers of sand and coral. The camera panned slowly across the deck. Everything looked frozen in time. Crates half open, ropes uncoiled, even a coffee mug, resting perfectly upright on a railing. It was as if the crew had simply vanished mid-motion. Elias whispered, "It's not just one ship. There are 3. He was right. The convoy, long thought lost, rested silently beneath them. The second ship bore markings of a refugee vessel. The third, a German destroyer, its guns still intact. As they adjusted the drone angle, a faint figure appeared at the edge of the frame, a shape that looked human, standing motionless near the bow. As if watching them, the camera shook, static filled the feed, and just before the screen went black, a face, pale, hollow-eyed, drifted toward the lens. The drone was retrieved the next morning. Its outer shell was scorched, as if by extreme heat. The recorded footage was incomplete, but one final clip, buried deep in the corrupted data, showed something chilling. A small lifeboat drifting above the wrecks, its oars moving on their own, cutting slowly through the black water. In the distance, faint lights glimmered, like lanterns hanging in the fog. Elias wrote in his logbook before leaving, "They are down there, waiting. But for what? I don't know." 2 months later, Elias Korhanen vanished during a solo dive in the Gulf of Bothnia. His last radio message was short, broken, and almost inaudible. "Engines. Running again." To this day, local fishermen avoid that part of the sea. They say their compasses spin wildly near those coordinates. Boats lose signal, and sometimes, at dusk, the horizon glows faintly, as if a distant fleet were sailing through the mist once more. But every now and then, someone claims to hear a sound, a faint metallic creak beneath the waves, followed by the echo of boots on steel decks, and the whisper of a captain's voice, calling his crew back to their stations. Perhaps it's nothing more than the sea's memory. Months after Elias Korhanen's disappearance, the Finnish Maritime Archive received an anonymous package. Inside, a soaked, salt-stained envelope, and a small metal drive, engraved with one word, Hannibal. When the data was recovered, it contained over 90 minutes of submerged footage. The visuals were fragmented, but the sound was crystal clear. A distant foghorn, men shouting in German and Polish, the sound of engines roaring to life, as if a fleet was preparing to sail again. At first, researchers thought it was historical audio, perhaps part of the lost Nazi archives. But soon, they realized something impossible. The background waves matched modern sonar patterns, not recordings from the 1940s. The sounds had been captured recently. The recovered footage showed the same ships, but this time, they weren't still. They were moving, gliding slowly through the deep, their hulls glowing with eerie bioluminescence. Through the murky waters, figures could be seen pacing the decks, shadow-like silhouettes, as if the convoy had returned to its eternal mission. One frame stood out, a rusted life buoy floating upward toward the surface. On it, barely legible, the word Wilhelm Gustloff, the name of one of the largest evacuation ships of Operation Hannibal, sunk in 1945 with over 9,000 souls aboard. It was as if the sea itself refused to let go. Over the years, locals have reported strange phenomena near that region: radio interference, mysterious lights beneath the water, and once, a fisherman swore he heard music, an old military march, drifting up from below the fog. When asked what he did, he replied quietly, "I turned my engine off and listened." He said the melody faded, followed by the sound of distant voices, chanting numbers, coordinates, and then a sharp metallic clang, like a ship's bell ringing underwater. Marine historians now refer to this region as the Ghost Corridor, a place where history and myth overlap, where time folds into itself, and where the remnants of one of the largest naval evacuations in human history seem to still echo beneath the waves. But perhaps the strangest theory came from a German naval archivist. He believed Operation Hannibal never truly ended, that those lost ships, those thousands of souls, were trapped in a repeating cycle, sailing endlessly toward a destination they would never reach. He wrote, "The Baltic remembers everything. The sea is not silent. It is speaking to those who dare to listen." So, when you stand by the Baltic coast on a cold winter night, and the fog rolls thick across the horizon, listen closely. You may hear the faint rumble of distant engines, the creak of steel hulls turning beneath invisible waves, and maybe, just maybe, the echo of a captain giving his final order: "All hands, prepare to sail." And as the mist swallows the sound, you'll know that somewhere out there, beyond the reach of time, the lost fleet of Operation